Alrighty, guys, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our March Demand Trends webinar. We're really glad to have you guys with us. As always, we're going to cover updates on job postings, Google search trends, and enrollment activity across programs ranging from certificates to doctoral degrees. We will also take a closer look at where we're seeing the most movement from shifting student interests to changes in demand. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's session is being recorded and we will share the recording and slides afterwards. If questions come up, please drop them in the Q&A box as we go. We will answer as many as we can live, save some for the end, and if we don't get to yours, someone from our team will follow up directly. With that, I'm happy to introduce Bob Atkins, CEO and founder of Great Decision Intelligence. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Reagan. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy day to come and see the webinar. We're going to be sharing our usual information today on demand for programs in higher ed. And I'm going to add something at the end, which is a little bit of news from the front on AI, practical experience that we're having out there that may be helpful to you as you pursue your own initiatives. So first, introduction to Gray. Our primary business is program evaluation and management. And we believe that to do that well, you need to understand markets, and we'll go through a bunch of market data today. You also need to understand margins for your programs because margins feed your mission. And finally, academics and whether the program is up to your academic standards, whether that's completion rates or passing nursing exams or just the rigor of the program itself. That's a terribly important dimension of this. And frankly, we primarily rely on our clients' judgment for that information. To do this well, you need to combine that data with a good process that engages the right people, shares the information with them and explains it to them, gives them the opportunity to discuss and evaluate that information, and then importantly, afterwards, creates an ongoing management process so that your programs are reviewed on a regular basis. The old model, which worked for years, maybe even centuries, of looking at them every 3 to 5 years, really doesn't do the job anymore. The world is changing too fast. God help us if we get close to this AI stuff, it's changing by the minute. You really need to look at your programs at least once a year. And there are dimensions of a program you may want to look at more frequently, particularly around fluctuations in student demand, so that you might be able to do something like adjust sections for the upcoming semester so that your resources are appropriately aligned with the volume of students you may have in a given program, which, by the way, may, as often as not, mean adding sections in a program that's in high demand. So that's our core. We're going to share with you today data that comes out of that business, and we'll start with Google keywords. So the way to read this chart is the dark blue line is 2024, the medium blue line is 2025, and the light blue is 2026. And what we're hoping for here is to see a steady increase from year to year. So the left bar would be lower, as we see here, than the middle bar, but then 2026 is well off the top. In fact, 2026 is down eponymously 26%. So we've got a pretty substantial drop-off in Google search volumes. Now, I don't believe that that's actually the result of a fundamental change in the interest in higher education. You'll see later on that there are other indicators we look at that suggest that the interest remains solid. What's going on here is there's a shift from keyword searches to AI searches that don't show up in this data yet. We haven't figured out how to do that. When we do, we will include it. But right now, I suspect that a lot of that is just a shift over in how people look for information, not a change in interest levels. And once that stabilizes, then this year-over-year growth will become a more meaningful indicator again, as it has been for years. But you can see this real shift back here in September when people began using AI much more heavily for their search volumes. So I think that's what's happening. I can't be sure. So what are they looking for and what's growing despite that secular decline in the use of search terms? Arts-related programs make the top of our list. 3D modeling and design tech, recording arts tech, art studies general, and drama arts, theater arts general. Health is number 2 in our list with 3 entries. Not surprising, it usually is one of the faster growing areas. Health and physical education, fitness general, pharmacology, and perfusion tech, all making the top 10. And finally, we have a couple of other programs: American Sign Language up 93%, and and electrical and communications engineering tech up 32%. So some really an interesting mix of programs at the that people are interested in. I was thinking that this showed an interest in hands-on things, sort of a rejection of all the tech we face. But as you look at it, it's really a mix. Many of the art aspects here are actually technical art programs, not sort of hands-on clay or painting. So it's back to using computers and other technology to create art. The exception would be drama and theater arts general. Now, fall enrollment, let's take a look at that at several levels. Here, we're going to start at the certificate level, see very strong growth, 7% increase in certificates at the undergraduate level, a 2% growth in the associates program, so in enrollment. So that's very encouraging. For all of you who are in four-year colleges, this is a really good sign because it means the pipeline of students coming out of community colleges should be growing, and many of those, about half, will go on to a four-year college. So if you're not actively cultivating relationships with your local community colleges, they remain a source of growth. They are also somewhat stigmatized, honestly, as I've talked to people. There's a perception that students from community colleges are somehow less than. The only empirical data on that I've heard, it was from Georgia Tech, I believe it was, and their professors believe that. Then somebody did the numbers only to find out that the students from the local community colleges actually did better than students who started at Georgia Tech. So that was a bit of a surprise. So I would take a hard look at those students and at this growing pipeline. The other reason it's really helpful is if you look at the enrollment by class and section, what you find is that, of course, your big entry-level classes are just that big. Where you start to run into problems with program economics and course economics is at the 300 and 400 level, where there are more small, more specialized classes. And these students come in precisely at that level. So it's really a big help to your financials if you can fill those classes. And this is a wonderful way to do it that works, is very helpful for the students as well to finish out and get a four-year degree. So what's going on in certificates? Well, healthcare makes the top of the list as usual with 3 programs: medical health and medical management and clinical assistant. We've got health and wellness, general, and rad tech. Those 2 are up 15%, and medical health management and clinical assistance up 37%. So some very healthy growth in enrollment in those particular programs. Then we have career and technical education, not CTE could also be, never mind. Auto body collision and repair tech up 19%, airframe aircraft mechanic up 16%, building construction site management up 15%, and electrician up 13%. So very healthy growth rates in a lot of the career and technical education programs. Then we have more infotech. Cybersecurity, as always in these things, is up 18%. One of the most consistent growers it's actually the most consistent grower in our data set, although you'll see a couple of other things that have done very well. And information technology up 16%. So some very healthy growth, a double-digit growth in a number of very large existing programs at their certificate level. Fall enrollment, now we're going to look at 5-year annual growth and cybersecurity. This is associate programs now. Cybersecurity over 5 years grew 18% a year. And it wasn't a small program when this time series started. So very large program, a lot of students taking it and still growing. Then we have 3 healthcare programs: diagnostic medical sonography, also known as an ultrasound tech, health services or allied health general, and rad tech, all up over 15%. And 3 of our top 10 from health. So that's as almost always a pretty big and growing area, a growing area in our material. And again, we get to the career and technical education, building construction site management, HVAC, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, airframe tech, and real estate. This is an interesting one. Several clients that I know of have really focused in on airframe tech and airplane maintenance in general. Huge employer demand for that. Difficult program to stand up in the sense that it requires some pretty significant capital, big physical spaces, and specialized instructors, but enormous amount of demand for the graduates. We have a shortage of airplane mechanics. So that's a really interesting field. And obviously, students are aware of that and starting to look at it. And then potential transfer programs. There are a couple I haven't mentioned: natural sciences and human resources management general, HR. Bachelor's level, the enrollment numbers are not as good. We're up 2%, which is better than it has been for a long time. I shouldn't say that. It's been up 2% last year. I think all of us were pretty traumatized as we look back through the teens with a steady decline and then COVID hitting in here. So it's nice to see these numbers ticking up. I know many of you are worried that we're about to start the demographic cliff. I know any number of clients who complained that their numbers were down because of the demographic cliff in prior years. As you can see, that cliff did not actually hit bachelor's enrollment in the aggregate. And in fact, it wasn't even scheduled to start until this year. So if your marketing guy is telling you that the demographic cliff is the problem, probably not true. And as we looked at it, the cliff is really not a cliff. If anybody would like, just put it in the message board here and I can share it with you. But we've looked at this pretty hard. And there are a couple things to keep in mind. One, at this point, the projected decline in the age group, 18-year-olds in particular, is what we picked, is about 1% a year. So, but it's going to go on for 10 years. So it's not a small amount in the end. But it's not what I would call a cliff. It's a headwind, and it can easily be overcome by effective marketing and recruiting at your campuses. Second thought, a big part of the problem with enrollment is actually not the number of people of a given age. The problem is that fewer people are choosing to go to college. So if you look across all ethnicities, about 2% fewer people are planning to go to college in the future. Or I'm sorry, between the ages of 18 and 24 are entering college. So that's a huge number of people simply choosing not to go. By and large, if we could restore that, we'd offset most of the effect of the demographic cliff over the next decade. So keep that in mind. We've got to get the word out that college is a good deal. We've all heard the negative news. I've looked at that pretty hard, and empirically, it's not true. College is very much worth it, and we need to get that message out there. In particular, when you look at the numbers, we need to get it out there to men. Most extreme, by the way, is white men, where the enrollment rate, 18 to 24, has declined by 5%, 3 or 4 percentage points, I should say, over the last 10 years. So we've got to get folks coming back to college, and that could, as I say, more than offset any effect of the cliff. But it's going to take a lot of effective messaging. And I think importantly, it's going to take messaging in the channels that folks like that are actually participating in. So if we're hoping to get that message across with, I'll pick a silly example, but with broadcast TV, this age group doesn't watch that. So we've got to figure out how to position the message in TikTok and other channels where the 18 to 24-year-old segment, and before that, since that's when they're thinking about going to college, are actually present and will hear the message. So that's just a little bit on what's going on with enrollment. What's growing, and now we've shifted over to 5-year annual growth. And you can see another one of these programs that's very big and been growing steadily, data analytics or data science, up 30% per year over the last 5 years. Very rapid growth, and now growing off a very large base as well. Of course, cybersecurity is there, but interestingly, number 2, business analytics is third at 17%. Then we have a stack of health-related programs: exercise physiology, rad tech, applied psychology, experimental psychology, and human biology, all but the last up over 10%. And then we have software engineering and a couple of, as a round out with the tech programs, and a couple of others, real estate development and business analytics. Think that actually is a reinforcement of the importance of these analytics programs. Not only data analytics, but a very similar program, business analytics, up well over 15%. So now let's take a look at the master's level. The news here is not so great, only up 0.4%, so essentially flat year over year. I think we're about to face a genuine cliff here. Sadly, a cliff of our own making, but a cliff nonetheless, and I'll come to that in just a minute. Master's fall enrollment, 5-year annual growth. There's that data analytics again in the first slot. Psychiatric mental health nursing, number 2. and we have 5 mental health or behavioral health programs making the top of our list. I mentioned psychiatric, mental health counseling, clinical medical social work, behavioral sciences, and finally applied behavior analysis. That's up 8%. The rest are all up well over 10%. So very strong interest in mental and behavioral health programs. We've got more analytics here, 17% up for financial and business analytics, 14% up for business analytics. So that analytic word is really important, and I think can be integrated in many places in the curriculum. I even think there's a role for it in the humanities to think about what analysis we could be running around the humanities, especially with AI. There are types of analysis that have never been possible before that can be done now. Use of words, use of phrases, how that varies by author or even within a book. There's all sorts of interesting quantitative analysis that could be done to encourage liberal arts students to keep their analytical muscles strong, because they'll be needed when they graduate. And then you can see 2 others in physical health, athletic training, and exercise physiology. So I mentioned that there was a cliff coming, and I think all of you are aware that we've got a little bit of a problem with international demand. Just how big is that problem? Well, this is what I would call a cliff. Down 60% year over year in the month of February. That's international page views, and that is a hell of a drop. Obviously, this is a result of a variety of things, ranging from, but primarily tighter visa policies and a feeling overseas that folks aren't welcome here anymore. So it's really hurt us badly. And this is going to come particularly to bear in our graduate programs. There are certain programs where most of the students were actually international. One I'm familiar with is computer science at the master's level. I believe over 60% of the students in that program are international students. So that particular program is going to get hammered. This is a huge self-inflicted wound. So where are those searches coming from? First note, China would be the top of this list, but it's only sporadically reported by our data source. So we don't include it in year-over-year numbers because, it might be in one time and out the next, in which case it would skew the numbers. And this month we didn't receive it, so you won't see it on this list. If it were here, it'd certainly be number 1. But India, pretty predictably, given the size of the country and the interest in international education, is number 1. Pakistan, number 2. I am surprised to see always Bangladesh is here, and Nigeria, very much towards the top of the list. Then we have Turkey, Ghana. Who would know? It's a pretty small country in Africa to be hitting the top 10. United Kingdom, Nepal, Brazil, and Germany. Now, let's put some numbers to that 60% drop. That's going to cost higher education something, it's a very rough estimate, around $8.5 billion of lost tuition. So this is one of the categories in our trade where we are a net exporter. That is, people come here to get an education, and that money stays in the U.S., if we will. We're bringing that currency from other countries and so forth to the U.S. And we're going to cut that down by $8.5 billion. So this is going to create, it's another headwind for higher ed, one that is much more significant and much more urgent than the cliff. There are some bright spots. There are not a lot of them here. There are 3 bachelor's programs that are still growing. Linguistics, the page views for that are up 87%, accounting up 29%, and business administration and management general up 10%. So only 3 out of all the programs, the hundreds of programs we could keep track of, are growing. The trick here is to be one of the slower losers. And cybersecurity, close to the top of the list, only down 2%. And you can see the rest, by the time you're down to number 10, they're dropping on the bachelor's level 26% year over year. Least declining master's programs, there were no master's programs that grew. You can see the best case here is down 18% for financial analysis. And from there on, we're down 37 to 46%. And obviously, if you're below this top 10 list, you're dropping even faster than that. And as a sort of best of the worst here is public policy, followed by medicine, medical informatics, logistics, then psychology, project management, arts, cybersecurity, and finance, all down about 45%. Now, employment is a different story. I've been outsmarted by the U.S. economy now for quite some time. No one, I thought I could do better than predicting what everyone else was saying. So a little humble pie here. I thought we'd be seeing declines in these numbers by now. All kinds of reasons why the U.S. economy should be shrinking, but our numbers on job postings are still growing. So that's a positive indicator. It's not proof that the economy is growing, but there are still folks posting jobs. So some of the stuff you're hearing about there being no jobs out there, I think is exaggerated. One thing I know is exaggerated, by the way, is the claim that all these jobs are being taken by AI and that there's therefore no future for any of us. We're all going to be displaced by robots. Maybe someday, but not anytime soon. Much of what you're hearing when people talk about AI, causing a layoff, I'm close enough to AI. We're building our own apps to know that I don't think anybody's developed AI that can displace, 3,000 or 4,000 people. But think about going to Wall Street and saying, I've implemented AI and I'm getting all these efficiencies from AI, and therefore I can lay off thousands of people. Sounds really good. Now let's replay that message and imagine that business was just a little slow, or a division of the company was being shut down. You go to Wall Street and say, I'm shutting down a division and therefore I'm laying off 3,000 people. That message will not be nearly as well received. So my guess of a lot of these layoffs that are attributed to AI is it's what you might call AI washing. They're making business problems seem like AI upgrades. And I suspect, therefore, that a lot of those announcements are simply not honest. So will we see impact? Absolutely. Where and how is very difficult to say. The studies that I've seen on this show that the companies that deploy AI end up increasing employment, not decreasing it. And I certainly know at my own company, AI has been, incremental headcount and incremental revenue. So we have not been able to downsize at all, and we use a lot of AI. We're just able to do more. So fastest growing job postings, where is that growth we saw? Health is up 4 of our top 10 programs, physical therapists, nursing assistants, rad tech again, through all our stuff, and then licensed practical or vocational nurses. Then we have a couple of trades programs, truck drivers, automotive service mechanics, and first line supervisors. And then finally, we have a few other programs, industrial engineers, software developers, and accountants and auditors. Which skills are growing? This shouldn't surprise anybody, but it surprised me. Artificial intelligence up 198%. Now, we do have a minimum of 10,000 skill requests here, but still, AI is coming off a comparatively small base. So while this is a very healthy growth number, it's not coming off, a big base where that's a massive, numerical increase. But still very healthy growth. And at that growth rate, it will be large very fast. CI/CD up 186%. We have a couple of other software and tech jobs, data centers, and Linux, both up well over 125%. Then we have occupational therapy, 171% growth, and physical therapy up 136%. And we have a collection of other programs, electrical engineering up 143, tooling 124, root cause analysis and scalability both about 115%. So what you're beginning to see here is, I think, a little resurgence in the traditional manufacturing side of the world and these other things, electrical engineering, tooling, root cause analysis, those all sound like scalability, factory-oriented skills. And there is, from what I understand, a resurgence there, and you're beginning to see it in the skills required. Alumni career path, the business side of healthcare. What do people actually do with a healthcare degree? And even at the master's level, most of those people are going to go in the fields for which they're not directly prepared. So while they're taking a program in healthcare, now some of these chief executives may be in healthcare spaces, but you see general and operations managers, other project specialists, management analysts, marketing managers, dosimetrists, and computer operations, all things that somebody with a master in healthcare administration may do over the course of their career. And then we have a couple where it's a direct fit, medical and health services managers and administrative service managers. So just keep in mind as you're designing those programs that people need to come out with a diverse set of skills, because there's a very good chance they're going to end up in a job that is not directly healthcare administration. So now let's switch gears. We're going to look at an individual program in some depth. We picked this month out of the top programs. And what you see here, just explain the chart for a moment, is total percentile ranking. So we have about 50 variables in our application. And this ranks all 1,500 academic programs on those 50 variables. And then that score is totted up, and each program gets a total percentile score based on the raw score that it received. So 94 means its raw score was as high as higher than 93% of other programs. So there are about 1,500 programs in the database. 6% of that, I can't do that in my head. Sorry, folks. It's about the 60th program, I think. So that's what we're looking at here. It's not the top 99th percentile, but very healthy overall rankings. Then we have student demand percentiles. And again, to get that high, you got to have pretty good student demand. Some of these are at the 98th and 99th percentile for student demand. We can see psychology as one of those. Employment percentiles over here. These are a little bit weaker overall. We get down in the 60s for some of these. And then finally, competitive intensity, keeping in mind that our numbers, high is always good. So that means a high competitive intensity scoring and percentile would mean relatively less competition. So don't want to confuse you, but if you just remember that high is always good, that'll help you understand why we can have a 95th percentile ranking and think that's a good thing in competition. So we're gonna pick one of these, psychology program that almost all of you have, and take a look at that in some more depth. Student demand for psychology is quite strong. Google search volumes are at the 96th percentile. New student enrollment volume is at 99th percentile. And the sum of on-ground and on-ground completions is also at the 99th percentile. Now, let me take a moment and just explain why we keep so many measures of student demand. It's really that they're telling us about different timeframes, and they're different in their reliability. So as I mentioned, Google search volume's got some issues right now, and it's an indirect measure. It's not actually a student, but it is forward-looking, which is a big advantage. This is people thinking about taking a program and searching for it using Google. So it's the only metric here that really gives you insight into what's coming up as opposed to what's already happened. Now let's look at sum of online and on-ground completions. That's from IPEDS. Now there's a challenge with IPEDS. It's good data, very complete. We do some cleanup, people who file in the wrong place and that sort of thing. But by and large, it's a very good database. There is a problem, though, which is that the most recent completion data is from 2023, I believe. No, maybe I'll give it, I think it's 2023. But in any case, it's now, several years out of date. And I'm sorry, I'm going to correct myself. We have 2024 now, but that's still a year or two out of date. That's not really the issue. The issue is that it's completions, and therefore somebody had to have picked their major 2 to 6 years before, 2 to 4 years before graduation would be fairer. So we're really looking at data about what students wanted back around 2020, which is still going to be contaminated by issues like COVID. So it's a little old. Enrollment is very current as of this fall, and Google search, as I mentioned, is forward-looking. So that's why we keep them all. And all of them have their idiosyncrasies. So you want to look at 2 or 3 to make sure you're not being misled in some way by one of the sources. International page views here are still good in total volume, 99th percentile. It's a popular program for international students as well. Now, the growth numbers are more of a mixed bag. Google search volumes are up 14%, so that bodes well for the future. But last fall, actual enrollment dropped 1%. Not a big drop, but still a bit of a concern for such a large program. And completion volume was actually up. So a few years ago, more people wanted to take psychology, and they graduated in 2024. So that's, I would say, it's difficult to interpret these particular numbers. It's a mixed bag, probably hovering around 0 at the end of the day. which is not surprising for such a large program. You wouldn't expect it to continue growing at a very rapid rate. So I'd say growth is TBD. Google's optimistic. New student enrollment, not so much. Now, let's think a little bit about what job psychology graduates can get. And here are the jobs that you would get for them if you looked at the National Center for Education Statistics Crosswalk. And you might ask me, well, why would I look at that? Well, it's kind of the crosswalk everybody uses. It underlies most data on labor market supply and demand. So people look at this to determine how many jobs are available for students in these programs. And several of the major labor market vendors depend on this information to assign jobs to programs. And you can see that there are logical things: a substance abuse and behavioral disorder counselor, clinical counseling, psychologists, psychology teachers, social science research assistants, and industrial and organizational psychologists. You can also see that there are very few jobs in these fields. The last four are under 100 jobs each nationwide in the US in February. So not a whole lot there for students. And as we saw, if we go back, we had 130,000 graduates, and we only have less than 10,000 jobs here. So if that were true, all of our psychology graduates would be either unemployed or working in Starbucks. Now, fortunately for psychology, it's not true, and it's not approximately true. Psychology majors don't go into that half dozen occupations. They actually go into over 782 occupations. And you can see here that one of these general and operations managers has more jobs available for psych graduates than all of the ones that were cited on the prior page. So that NCS crosswalk is quite misleading. Now, let's think about what we mean by misleading here. If somebody were within 5 or 10% on an estimate like this, with the volumes of data that we're talking about and all the ambiguities about how markets really behave and about what particular jobs are and so forth, that's as good as you're going to get. So a 10% miss is not a substantial miss. But when I have to multiply by 100 to get to the numbers, that's a problem. And as you can see here, what is it? Well over 500,000 jobs are actually out there just in the top 10 alone. And the pay here is healthy. I will tell you, it's not great for a bachelor's degree. It is well above the median wage for a high school graduate, which is about $51,000, $52,000. So it's not as though they're not making money, but they're not making as much money as people in many other majors do. So keep this in mind and check your data sources. If they're telling you that there are only 5 jobs for graduates of almost any program, the data is just wrong. So let's take a look at what people actually do and what jobs there are out there. Job postings for this set of the things we were just looking at the 99th percentile. BLS current employment, 99th percentile. BLS job openings, 99th percentile. So actually, there's a very healthy job market for psychology graduates. The growth of all those areas that we crosswalked to, 3 to 5% over the last few years. And job postings per graduate, they're 1.3, which is only the 53rd percentile. It's about average. If you get to something like nursing, you'll see job postings per graduate in the 4 to 7 range. So that's what it looks like when you have a shortage. As I say, this is about average. But not nearly as grim as it would have appeared had we only looked at those 5 things that were shown by the NCS crosswalk. So now let's take a look at how it does on some other metrics, in particular wages. This is not such a good thing. And one thing to start with, though, is how many of these folks are going into those direct prep jobs. And when we analyze this, only 5% of psychology graduates end up in the direct prep fields. So 95% of them are going to do something else. Let that sink in for a moment, because it's a real issue with employment data if you don't include the jobs that people really do. So that's the direct prep point, and that's why these folks do okay in terms of getting jobs. But even the jobs they get are not great. So entry 25th percentile wages, 49,000. You recall I mentioned that I think high school grads are around 50, 51. So when they start out, they're making less than a high school grad. It does get better post-entry with a bachelor's, 75,000. dollars. So now they're ahead of a high school grad, but they are in the bottom 30% of all programs at the bachelor's degree level. And its entry wage is the 22nd percentile. So for a bachelor's degree program, this one, for some reason, doesn't fare very well in terms of pay. Post-entry masters gets better in dollars, but again, is not very good performer in terms of the percentile. But people here are now making $95,000 a year, so it's not bad, but it's not great for a bachelor's degree. Underemployed percentage of graduates is a very concerning number. Here at 51% of graduates underemployed, these are folks working at Starbucks and other jobs that don't require a college degree. That's a concerning number, honestly. And it's at the 34th percentile. So again, bottom third of bachelor's programs on that metric. Now let's shift gears and talk about competition and who else is out there. Well, as you might imagine, pretty much everybody's out there offering a psychology program. So it is the first percentile. Remember, I is good on this. So the first percentile means it's one of the worst programs in terms of amount of competition. For better, for worse, the number of competing schools has declined. Not a good indicator for higher ed. I suspect many of those schools actually went out of business. And then we've got some folks with online in-market students at 342. So online is also at the first percentile, suggesting that it's unusually competitive. What's interesting here is that the median program completions, despite all that competition, are very healthy, 32. So that means that there are going to be about 4 or 5 times that many students actually in school when you account for all 4 years in attrition. So you're looking at 150 students. So a very healthy program in terms of size, and neither growing nor shrinking. So while that competition is keeping the growth rates down for individual programs, it's not ultimately causing a decline. So still a healthy program in terms of market response. Google search cost per click, it's an expensive program to recruit for. Second percentile on cost per click, and the competition index is in the 20th percentile. So very competitive program, as you would expect with all those schools out there. Also, relatively high percentage of these students are doing the course online, 86th percentile and 77th percentile in terms of the percentage of online students in this program. Any questions so far? Somebody is asking here, are wages for the country as a whole? Yes, they are for the country as a whole. It's a good question whether they're skewed by major cities. I haven't seen huge variations when we do this for local markets. If you want data for your local market, we keep this data down to, it's in some cases, the census tract level, at worst case, the county level. So we can pull your state or even the 50-mile radius around your school and tell you what your local market looks like. Obviously, in a presentation like this, I use national data. So let's move on. And this is our the summary view of the program profile. You can see the colors are very helpful when you got all these numbers. The dark green means it's the 98th percentile. And in general, green is good, and that pink color is not great. So very quickly, you can see all the nice size of the program. As I mentioned, 99th percentile, you can see jobs are good. You can see competition's got a lot of pink, so I should be worried over there. And down here, when I look at wages, I've got a sea of pink and orange. So it very quickly, when you learn to read these sheets, allows you to flag a program and what the particular issues may be with that program. Now, I should comment here a bit on wages. What you find with wages in general is if you go into a service occupation, you're generally going to be paid less. And there's an exception for nursing and doctors, but social services, not going to get paid a lot of money. School counselor, not going to get paid a lot of money. So many of the students who study psychology are going to end up in those helping fields. And when you go into those fields, you just don't make a great deal of money. So that's part of what's dragging this down, is that many of these graduates are going to go into fields that are just not well paid, but do align with a concern for others, and in particular for their mental health. So we need these folks. We got a mental health crisis, and we just don't really want to pay for them. So I admire the people who go into this, frankly. We need their help, but I don't know that we have the desire to pay what it's worth. Regan, sorry.
Bob, off the top of your head, do you know what the trend for entrepreneurs in consulting is, whether they're on the incline or decline?
Hmm. So people who go into consulting as entrepreneurs, is that what we're asking?
I
Um, you
Yes.
think yes. So remember why people often go into consulting. It's a euphemism for unemployment. So I would, that's what you do when you're between jobs. Now, having spent my career also as a consultant, I don't mean to say that that's what everybody does, but it would be very difficult to sort out growth in the number of people who are going into consulting and entrepreneur from necessity as the mother of consulting. So I don't know, but right now I'd be a little skeptical that those folks are really entrepreneurs as opposed to folks putting a better face on a job search. By the way, I also would say if you are unemployed, that doing some consulting is good for the soul and for the pocketbook. And if you're really good at it, what you can do is take your consulting practice and turn it into a piece of software. Because once it's software, it's a much better, more repeatable business. So I don't know is the short answer, but I'd be suspicious of any statistics on that right now. The consulting firms, in particular, have been hit hard by AI. Many of the entry-level roles are very doable. Basic research. I don't mean the kind of basic research you do in the sciences, but industry research on a competitor. You can do a very good job of that. Google Deep Research in an hour, and you'd be spending 59 of those minutes getting a cup of coffee while the machine works. So it's hit consulting hard. And I used to follow Glassdoor closely, and there's a real feeling in Glassdoor among consultants that their industry's gotten a lot less attractive than it used to be for entry-level employees. So long answer to a short question. A couple of other things we show on here that are helpful to you. We do have cost benchmarking data, so you can see whether this program is more or less expensive than a typical program. And the average cost per student credit hour for psychology is 81% of the norm. So it's a little bit less expensive to teach than the average program. And the median is a little bit higher at 90%, but still below average in terms of cost to teach. And then we do keep track of information about what enrollment completions and national completions are by degree level. So you can see how that breaks down. And this is important when you're trying to figure out what degree level to make a given program. This is predominantly a bachelor's level program, though it also is well represented in terms of enrollment at the associate's level. One of the fun things we do with AI now is we can actually provide you with a written summary of all that data. So for those of you who don't want to look at all those numbers, I count myself among you, you can actually read and get a good sense of how this program's doing. And these are produced for you by program for whatever market you happen to be looking at. And we generally will have your local market in our systems once we set them up for you, plus 3 or 5 other market definitions. You can get this written summary for each of 1,500 programs in any of those market definitions. It takes about a minute to produce on a system. So folks find it helpful, especially if they have to give a summary to someone else. Now let's shift gears and talk about AI for a minute, partly because everybody's talking about AI, so why not us too? Partly because we actually are active in the field, both in terms of developing AI software and in physically observing how it's being used and what the reactions are to it in higher ed. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about that. So first, I'd like to get your insights on what barriers you're facing in terms of implementing AI on your campus. There are a lot of them, and I'd be interested to know which ones are most pertinent for you. You are welcome to check more than one, and I'm sure that in many cases there's more than one barrier on your campus. So, Regan, should I wait for the answer to the poll here, or should I keep going?
Give us 1 second. It looks like they're coming in right now. I'll end it here in about 30 seconds and then share the results.
Great. And obviously, we made this list of potential barriers, and they're all things we've seen. Budgets are tight out there, and so any price, even if it's a low price, is a problem. There are a lot of concerns about the impact on teaching and student learning and cognitive development, and interesting. So the security privacy is number one. I did not expect that. Yes, integration, pedagogy. I would have expected pedagogy, and there are real issues there. So let me keep going and share what we're actually seeing out there. So this is my metaphor. We've got this great AI rocket that's moving at an incredible pace, really taking off. And I discovered to my dismay that to implement it, you have to hook into IT systems that and processes that just are slow and difficult to hook up with. So IT turns out to be a barrier here, even though these systems really don't need to be integrated with your IT at all. People like the idea that it's integrated in the LMS, and indeed ours will be, but there's not really any compelling need to integrate with an LMS. The systems work fine separately. The loading of data from a course to an AI takes about 5 minutes. But to make it really easy for everybody, it probably should be in the LMS. But keep in mind that imposes a delay, a substantial delay on the ability to implement as you work through all the IT issues and so forth. So this is my imagery. You've got this incredible 21st century system that's getting hooked up to legacy IT systems, some of which are 20, 25 years old. So that's going to be a major barrier. So now adoption. What have you or will you adopt? While you're doing that, security, at least for our models, that's really not an issue. Yes, if your students and professors are using OpenAI, the public version, you should be very worried. But now I think most colleges have gotten one form or another of corporate version of the AI models, where the data is in fact secure. The general models are not being trained on your information. And certainly in systems we offer, that training does not take place. So while there are RAG systems, that is research augmented generation, the main model is not being trained on the data. The inference engine does look at the information when it's giving an answer, but that answer can't be accessed by anybody outside of your institution. And in fact, in our stuff either, in the specific course or the specific student. So it is a real issue if you're using general AI models. As I say, I doubt many of you still are. And then for these particular tools, they're all locked down. So yeah, that's what I thought. Most of the people I've talked to have got some sort of general purpose AI that they've implemented because of the security issue. So many campuses have that, and I hope they're telling you that that's the only thing you can use, because otherwise all that data is going out into the universe. And AI for marketing, I'm also seeing one of the earlier adoptions, and I think can be very effective in the marketing and admissions pipeline. So what happened when we actually put a tutor out into the world? So first, let's keep in mind that it could have flat out failed. It's a new technology, it's unproven, and the task we're asking it to do is extremely complex. To take the material for a particular course that's been loaded into the system, so the course material is the answers the AI is going to give, and we ground it in that course material, and then be able to answer the random student question on that in an intelligent and helpful way. So realistically, the odds of failure here are really high. But the AI is also incredibly sophisticated. And it's not just ours. This is the nature of these models these days. And what we found in practice was faculty and students appreciated the opportunity to work with a well-developed tutor. They liked it. And it could well have gone the other way. The rating on this was 4.75 out of 5 from the students. So they liked it a lot. Keep in mind, it didn't do their assignments. That made the faculty like it more. It did give good explanations, though, and it was appreciated for these almost human-like characteristics of being non-judgmental. One quote was, "I could ask dumb questions and not be embarrassed." And anybody who's struggling with a course is going to tend to feel that their question is dumb, when in most cases it isn't. And certainly for them has to be answered in order for them to progress. So that ability to be in a judgment-free environment is really important. Um, what I was most excited by that we didn't anticipate at all is the ability of instructors to create what I'm going to call dynamic assignments. Now, I don't think that that phrase has any meaning at this point. So let me explain it a bit. If you assign something, it's at best sort of a student deriving information from a book or an equation, and then interpreting that and doing the assignment. In these assignments, the student can actually interact with the AI as part of the assignment. So a good example of this is nursing, where in fact this feedback is from, and the instructor was able to set up patient instances, simulations, and the students could go back and forth with those sims using nursing process, asking questions, conceptually administering treatments to those patients and see what the responses were and keep going through those simulations. So while I think the perception is that AI is curtailing critical thinking, in fact, if you do it right, AI is a very rich environment that stimulates thinking. And as I have to admit, not our idea. This is from a wonderful professor of nursing out in the Midwest, and used this several times. Used it in an in-class assignment where they broke into small groups, and they each had a slightly different patient, but generally the same illness, and they could go through that. And each group would go through the sim, and then they could get together as a full class and discuss that sim and what they had learned from it. Practical results, I believe the overall test scores in that course went up, but in particular, the external test that nurses take to prepare for the NCLEX, called HESI, those scores went up in particular. They went up for the two strongest students in the course. And those were also the most engaged with the AI. And their scores went up 10 to 20%. So both of them had scored about 1,000 on the HESI exam. 850 is considered good. 750, I believe, is passing. So they were already well ahead of a passing grade. They were hitting 1,000, and their scores went up to 1,100 and 1,200 each. So, and those are the students who were most involved with the AI, in particular, setting up these case studies for themselves and being able to have a very rich interaction with the AI around the simulations they created. So they really appreciated it. This was also not quite what I expected. I expected to see the folks who needed help being the most engaged in getting help. What we actually saw were some of the strongest students in the class using it quite extensively to deepen their knowledge. So I don't know if that's going to persist in other classes, but it's quite an intriguing finding that while everybody had access, not everybody had the inclination to engage at that level of depth. The other thing that's very important in adoption is whatever you do with AI, it's got to save people time. Higher ed, with all the budget cuts and so forth, has been under tremendous pressure, and people don't have time. So as you build out these things, be sure to embed time-saving capabilities for your faculty. In this case, they could create the simulations in minutes, generate multiple choice tests, generate long-form tests, and those are not, I wouldn't advise that without human interaction, human in the loop. But it does say, the person said it saved them, 90% of the time they would normally take, though they did have to do edits. So that's what we picked up out there. The other part is that the economic opportunity here is enormous. In our economics work, we're able to capture data on DFWs by course. And then we decided to run out the numbers to see what the likely cost was to the institution in terms of lost revenue of DFW rates. And there were 0.3% of the 39,000 or 36,000 courses here that lost over $1 million in future revenue from an individual course. You can see we have about 1% that lose 500,000 to $1 million. And then it starts to get to be larger percentages, but lower dollars. But one to keep an eye on there is 5% of courses lost between $100,000 and $500,000 in future revenue per course. If you look across the database of some 70 institutions, that adds up to $387 million a year in lost revenue. So if you're wondering how to get money back from your investment in AI, I would aim it straight at DFW rates. There's a large pot of money here, and everybody wins when you improve DFW rates. The institution earns more money, the student passes and graduates and goes into the workforce, which benefits the workforce. It really is a win for everybody involved. So with all the hard choices we have to make, where there's always a trade-off and often a person that's being dropped as a result, this is one where we can make higher education really better for everybody. So let me summarize. In February, Google searches for academic programs fell 26%. Keep in mind that's probably the AI transition. Interest in the arts is growing, and interest in healthcare programs is also growing. Year-over-year enrollment at community colleges rose 7% for certificates, 2% for associates. So you do have that feeder path that's getting larger and should be helpful for all of you who are in four-year colleges. Obviously, it's a very good sign for all of you who are in community colleges. At the certificate level, we saw medical health management and clinical assistant grow very rapidly over the last 5 years. And at the associate level, cybersecurity grew the most in that same time period. Fall enrollment in bachelor's programs was up 2%, master's was flat, and data analytics and science, as we talked about, has grown the most since fall 2021. Job postings are up, again, surprising given what we're hearing about the job market. Physical therapist was the fastest growing occupation. I guess I'm not the only person with a bad back. And demand for a bachelor's in psychology is strong, but the wages are not. But keep in mind that the most common occupations for those graduates are things that are not directly aligned with psychology per se. Though almost everything we all do, regardless of occupation, relies on a strong understanding of human behavior. So I would argue psychology is a good preparation for any field where you have to interact with other human beings. And then finally, the initial acceptance and benefits of an AI tutor are very positive. So some of the fears that people have about that are misplaced. This can be a very helpful addition to the classroom. Thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you next month. And thank you for your responses to the surveys. We'll be using that information, very helpful to us as we move forward. I'm fine if anybody has any questions. We have a minute or two left. Please feel free to fire away.
We do have one question in the Q&A right now, Bob. Do you know, top of mind, if the increased interest in the arts have a specific demographic connected to it? And is there any way to know what demographics would be behind the searches are? Do we have that data, etc.?
So we do. I don't have it at my fingertips. There's some analysis we can do in Google to try and tease out age groups and such. But I'm afraid I don't know right now. Great question. James, I see your comment on AI adoption. The thing to remember here is it actually doesn't cost very much. And certainly you can get started and prove in the case for very short money. So I would say, unlike adopting the big models that you have to do across campus where it's an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can get started with AI tutors and career advisors and such for a few $1,000s and prove them in. So there's no reason to let money get in the way here. It really isn't. Of course, we'd rather have a bigger contract, but I understand people need to figure this out and prove it in at their institution before they can scale.